This man didn't rob one bank. He robbed dozens of them. Prosecutors charged him with crimes that could have meant up to 160 years in prison. He only served 2 years and walked free. Some of the crimes he committed remain unsolved, but that's not the strangest part. While doing all this, he often had a camera in his hand. He wasn't just stealing, he was recording himself committing crimes like he was vlogging. This man was a ghost who could parachute into an imperial palace in Vienna and steal a royal diamond star. But the very same man, years later, was an amateur who stole game consoles from a tech store and forgot the rental car he drove there at the scene. Law enforcement would later describe him as one of modern history's most creative criminal minds. His school friends, however, had only one word for him: loser. His name is Gerald Blanchard. This is not a simple story about theft. It's proof of what can happen when raw intelligence, poverty, and an addiction to adrenaline collide. So how did he get to this point? The story begins in Winnipeg, in a house that looks ordinary from the outside. Little Gerald is adopted when he is around 6 years old. On paper, life with his mother Carol and his stepfather doesn't look too bad. Then the marriage falls apart, and so do the money and the peace. Carol takes her children and moves to Omaha, Nebraska in the United States. That's where they truly meet poverty. Gerald remembers the whispered phrases in the kitchen: bank, foreclosure, losing the house. In his mind, money becomes a threatening word at a very early age. One morning, there are cornflakes on the breakfast table, but there is no milk. They open the fridge. The only thing they can find is a bottle of soda. And that day, the image etched into his memory is this: not milk poured over the cornflakes, but soda. At home, he is a quiet child who plugs and unplugs cables, takes electronic devices apart, and puts them back together again.
At school, he is the kind of kid who doesn't cause trouble, who sits quietly in the back row. But once he steps outside the house, someone else appears. One night, the bottle of milk left on a neighbor's doorstep goes missing. Then it happens again, and again. At first, it's to survive. Then it becomes a habit. Then it's simply because he can. He starts stealing food from the market, slipping small items into his pockets. Years later, talking about that period, he will say, "My life turned to crime when I started stealing food from the market. It started out of necessity, then I became addicted to the thrill." By the time he's in middle school and high school, petty theft is no longer enough. At 15, he sets his sights on an electronics store, a Radio Shack. On Easter Sunday, when the store is closed, they break in. They disable the alarm system and don't just grab a few gadgets off the shelves, they nearly empty the store. The next day, when the employees arrive, the shelves are bare. The police follow the trail and arrest Gerald. At 15, he stands trial on charges of grand theft. His sentence is only 3 months in a juvenile detention center. For Gerald, this is not a deterrent. It cements a feeling inside him. I did it and got off this easy? That means I can do something much bigger. When he leaves juvenile detention, he doesn't slow down. Before he even turns 16, he can no longer keep the money he steals in a drawer. He fills trash bags with it. At some point, he asks himself, since I'm taking this much risk, why am I still bothering with markets and stores? Why not banks? At a very young age, he even buys a house with stolen money. Later, he openly admits that millions passed through his hands, but he never stopped committing crimes because he was addicted to the adrenaline rush. By the mid-1990s, he is a man wanted in the United States for various crimes. In 1993, he is sitting in an interrogation room at a police station in Iowa, staring at the ceiling. Lightweight panels, empty space above.
As soon as the officers walk out, he steps onto the chair, pushes the panel up, and climbs into the ceiling. The police think he has run out the door. They search outside. All the while, Gerald waits for hours in the dark, right above their heads. When the station finally calms down, he climbs down. He wanders the hallways, finds a police uniform, a badge, and a gun. He leaves a single bullet on the interrogator's desk, and then walks out the front door, dressed as a police officer. The next day, he is caught again. This time, he is handcuffed in the back seat of a police car. He strains his shoulders until he can bring the handcuffs from behind to the front. The key is still in the ignition. He slides into the front seat, starts the engine, and escapes in a police car. After a short chase, he is caught again and receives a prison sentence of around 4 years. When his sentence is over, he is deported from the US to Canada in 1997 and banned from entering the country for 5 years. Now his target is not just a single store or a single bank. His target is the system itself. He builds a small team around him. ATMs, bank branches, and card systems become the new hunting ground. His operations extend beyond the Canadian border, into Europe, and even Africa. The Canadian police give the investigation into this man a name: Project Kite. But Blanchard is a ghost, moving around with dozens of fake identities. By 1998, the most unbelievable chapter of Gerald's story is about to unfold. This time, his sights are set on Europe, Austria, Vienna. The target, Schönbrunn Palace. This is not just a building, it's a fortress. Inside, on display, is a priceless Cockert diamond star once worn by Empress Elizabeth of Austria, better known as Sisi. High-tech alarms, motion sensors, bulletproof glass, armed guards constantly on patrol. For an ordinary thief, this is an impenetrable zone. But Gerald is not working like an ordinary thief. He is working like a meticulous film director. He first enters the palace disguised as a tourist, accompanied by his wife and father-in-law. But his eyes are not on the paintings. They are on the camera's blind spots, the positions of the sensors, the timing of the guard rotations. With a hidden camera, he records every corner, every sensor, every second of the security guard's shift changes. And one night, one of the most daring scenes in the history of crime unfolds. Gerald doesn't force any doors. He doesn't break any windows. He comes from the sky. He jumps out of a small plane and lands softly on the palace roof with a parachute. At least that's how he later tells it. He moves carefully through the blind spots of the motion sensors and reaches the display case. From his pocket, he takes out a cheap replica star, the same size and appearance, bought from the palace gift shop. He opens the display case, lifts out the real jewel, puts the fake in its place, tightens the screws, and slips back into the shadows. For 2 whole weeks, thousands of tourists from all over the world stare in awe at that $10 piece of plastic in that glass case, taking pictures, admiring it. Gerald leaves Vienna with an imperial treasure in his pocket, and no one even knows it's gone. He doesn't sell the jewel. He doesn't pass it through the black market. He takes it to Canada and locks it away in an old safe in his grandmother's basement. Because Gerald knows, one day, when he really needs it, that stone might be the trump card that saves his life. Years pass. Gerald, the ghost of Vienna, is back in Winnipeg in 2004, visiting his grandmother. He learns that several small CIBC branches in the area are closing, and that they're building one huge central branch to replace them all. A new building, a lot of money, and a security system that isn't fully active yet.
For Gerald, this isn't just information, it's an invitation. But he doesn't storm in wearing a mask and carrying a gun like in the movies. He is a criminal who dislikes violence and worships cleverness. This robbery will be the product of months of obsessive preparation. He buys a fluorescent vest and a hard hat from a hardware store and a baby monitor from a toy store. He puts on the vest and helmet, walks into the construction site like any other worker, and hides the baby monitor inside the building. Now, from outside, he can listen to what's happening inside. Meanwhile, he orders the exact same locks used in the bank's vaults. At home, he takes them apart and puts them back together over and over until he can defeat the mechanism in seconds. When the time is right, he goes back, just before the bank opens to the public, after the cash has been loaded inside. At night, when no one is around, he opens the ATM vaults and pulls out roughly $500,000 in cash. No glass is broken, no guns are drawn, no explosions. The alarms don't make sense to the people responding. Even experienced detectives say they've never seen a robbery carried out like this. But that night, one tiny detail isn't missed. An employee at a nearby Walmart notices a suspicious car waiting outside the bank for a long time and reports the license plate to the police. The plate is checked. The car was rented under the name Gerald Blanchard. The missing piece of Project Kite falls into place.
The ghost now has a name. The police begin tapping phones, quietly putting together attacks in Canada, Europe, and Africa, fitting them into the same puzzle. They wait for the right moment. In early 2007, Gerald tries to enter the ATM room of a Scotiabank branch near Vancouver by coming in through the ceiling. This time, it's not just cameras watching, the police are listening too. He is caught red-handed. In court, he faces at least 16 separate criminal charges. On paper, the theoretical maximum sentence could reach 160 years. On paper, his story should end here, with a man spending the rest of his life in a concrete box. But Gerald does what he has always done. He uses what he has as leverage. He confesses to his crimes. He gives the police a detailed account of how he did them. He agrees to pay compensation to the banks. And then he plays the card he has been holding for nearly a decade. He tells them about the royal jewel that no one has been able to find for years. He points them to a box hidden in his grandmother's basement in Winnipeg. Inside, they find the Star of Sisi, the jewel that disappeared from Vienna. He uses that star like a poker chip on the table. In the end, a deal is made. Gerald is sentenced to 8 years in prison, but with credit for cooperation and good behavior, he is released after around 2. For a while, he uses his skills on the other side. He earns money as a consultant on security systems, this time getting paid to strengthen the very kinds of systems he spent years breaking. Years later, he seems to become something else entirely. A middle-aged man in Vancouver, British Columbia, flying drones, keeping exotic cats, living a life that looks almost ordinary from the outside. But in 2017, game consoles stolen from an electronics store in Ontario and a rental car left parked at the scene point police records back to a familiar name, Gerald Blanchard. The genius thief who could parachute onto an imperial palace roof reappears, this time brought down by one of the simplest mistakes. Today, Gerald is in his 50s, married, and on the surface, living a normal life. But the trail he left behind isn't just a string of thefts. It's a dark example of what can happen when intelligence, poverty, and an insatiable hunger for adrenaline are all pointed in the wrong direction.